Sam, I'm going to turn to you next. The Hepatitis C Trust supported people before the inquiry, supported people throughout the inquiry, but you've told us in your statement that the distress and confusion that is being reported to you and your colleagues on a daily basis is like nothing we've heard or seen before. Is that right?
Absolutely right.
Do you want to speak closer into the microphone, Sam?
Absolutely right, Jenny.
I think you'll have to try a bit closer again.
Closer still. Ooh.
Perfect.
Thank you. Absolutely, Jenny. It's been completely overwhelming. We had lots of peaks and troughs with calls over many years with the inquiry. But the surge from last May was absolutely overwhelming and still increasing. I was trying to think of a word to describe it for you. Tsunami. I don't think that does it justice. We're usually on a hurricane level. At the moment, it's presently stormy, but I'm pretty sure it will pick up again after this.
And one of the areas of concern that has been reported to you, and in turn reported by you through your evidence to the inquiry, amongst those infected with hepatitis C, is concerns about how hepatitis C is treated under the scheme. Can you just tell us a little about what some of those concerns are?
Absolutely. There's a complete lack of understanding from the community as to how they've arrived at such low payments for people with hepatitis C, a devastating disease in itself, not just a liver disease. And for those that have done the older treatments, the treatments for it can also have an incredible physical and mental health impact. Those don't seem to have been included or thought of. Perhaps no surprise, because the community wasn't really consulted in the structure of them. They didn't get that input. They didn't get the expertise of organisations like ourselves.
And one of the features of the scheme that has been flagged up by a number of people, including you in your statement, is how the burden of proof is going to work, because it's not just that someone has to prove that they were infected with hepatitis C as a result of treatment with blood or blood products. They have to prove all sorts of other pieces of information to demonstrate which level or band they fall within. And you've had a number of concerns expressed to you, I think, as to how that's going to work. Absolutely.
Again, the SCM category provided a place for people that had Hep C who didn't have severe advanced liver damage or some of the other limited range of conditions for stage 2 payments. It provided a space for them to make claims for the other physical and mental health impacts on them, and was very much welcomed. And now that doesn't look like it's going to be included in any way. It's very narrow how they are judging it with the Severe Health Award. People will have to provide very strong evidence. We know from most of the work we do is helping people to find bits of information from whichever year, going back decades and decades. It's very difficult for them to do. There's also sort of things like, you know, some people may have, for example, something like depression. They may have been diagnosed a long time ago with their hepatitis C infection. That's already has quite a big impact on people's mental health. They may then have gone on to do the interferon treatments, which would have magnified any existing problems that they had with their mental health, or possibly brought out underlying problems with their mental health, or for the first time may have given them problems with their mental health. I had a call recently from somebody who described this experience. She cleared a long time ago with her infection of Hep C. She didn't have severe liver damage. She was discharged back into the community. You're then left with nowhere to go. You can go to your GP, but they're not going to know anything about the hepatitis C infection. They're not going to know anything about the impacts of previous treatments, probably new ones as well. She described how she had to sort of get on with her life after she'd recovered from the treatment, a laborious process in itself. And time kind of went on, and other problems were going on in her life, which delayed her seeking access for that. She was just having to get on with it. And then when you do go for help, for example, with mental health issues, and you go to the GP, unless you're very fortunate, you will usually have a sort of brief discussion. Perhaps things like antidepressants can be offered. They can be useful. They can, be a contribution to managing that for some people. But really what you're wanting is referral to special mental health services and support. If you do start to go down that route, it's likely to take, I can't even put a time on it. I think most people here will be familiar. It's a long, long journey, a long, long wait to have proper psychological and or psychiatric help. You may be offered talking therapies, a brief set of sessions with a counsellor that is not of your choice, and really is going to be very ill-equipped to support you with the wide range of mental health issues that may have presented themselves as a result of your infection, your diagnosis being infected by the state, essentially, and the treatments for it. This leaves people where they were recognised with SCM. There was an acknowledgement of those impacts there. I don't know how people are going to do that going forward, let alone for other health conditions that may have been caused or brought forward by the hepatitis C or the treatments for it.
I don't know if you've seen it, Sam, but the inquiry has seen a statement from psychologists at
Yes.
the Infected Blood Psychology Service expressing those very concerns about what it is the regulations require people to prove.
Yes.
And how high a burden that's going to impose that most people won't be able to cross.
Absolutely. And as other people have talked about earlier, not everyone, but the large majority of people in this community are getting older. They may have other health problems connected with or unconnected with their original infection. They have mobility issues. They may be socially isolated. They may not be on the internet for getting information. All of these sort of things contribute to put more and more barriers there for people getting the help that they need. And now, to get payment for them, to acknowledge that, to acknowledge what's happened to them, seems to be pretty much nigh on impossible with the burden of proof that's expected.
And Sam, I just want to get a sense of what the burden has been on the Hepatitis C Trust as an organisation, which, as you know, one of the inquiry's recommendations was a recommendation of funding, and I'm going to pick that up with Kate shortly. But you've described those in your organisation having to work above and beyond anything they ever dreamt of to become, as it were, a substitute for what the scheme should be doing.
Yes, Jenny. When I think back to when Sir Brian launched the report that day, and we were all leaving community, campaigners, organisations, I'm sure inquiry staff too, it was like being carried out on a wave out of the building of this sort of collective unburdening. There was something approaching joy and hope that carried us all out of here, and as others have described already, I won't labour it, but very quickly, there was the apology, there was the promise of compensation, whatever it takes, from Rishi Sunak, and then there was a general election. That was the starting point for people to... I felt like I'd been slapped in the face. I can't imagine how it felt for the community when we had that brief moment of thinking things were moving. They were moving quickly with the guidance that Sir Brian and the inquiry team had put together on how to deliver it. And as months have gone on, it just got worse. Again, as others talked about here, IBCA and the Cabinet Office held meetings. There were some sort of token engagements, as people have described, they didn't have the time to talk, to explore some of the issues that were important to them. The way things started to emerge as we heard about the secret group, the secret expert group, who had clearly got it all wrapped up with a bow. There was no consultation and input into that. Why weren't there people like a haemophilia specialist as part of that group? Why wasn't the expertise of ourselves and Haemophilia Society, who've been working with this group, infected and affected, for decades, why weren't we part of that process? And why weren't the community part of that process? Unfortunately, the way it kind of unraveled was, I think as Mary said earlier, some groups were chosen. I don't know how they were chosen. I don't know if it was another random selection. But some groups were chosen to come forward, some weren't. Why is that? You can't speak to every single person in the community, but do you know what? That's what's such a shame, because every single person in this community is an individual, and they have very individual experiences and physical and mental health impacts and viruses.
Thank you, Sam. I'm just going to pick up with Lynn, a couple of those themes, if I may. Lynn, you too have had experience as an organisation representing Haemophilia Wales with the process of engagement. What's been your experience of that?
Well, the very first round of engagement meetings, Haemophilia Wales was excluded from them. So I did question that with the Cabinet Office, as I thought they'd made just an error, but I was told that we weren't included. So, you know, that was quite shocking. But there hasn't been any meaningful engagement, as all the decisions relating to the eligibility criteria and the tariffs and the appeals have been made by Sir Jonathan Montgomery's secret expert group, as others have referred to. And the group was appointed by Lord Howe. The government has not followed the advice of the Infected Blood Inquiry's 71 experts and recommendations, and has set about rewriting Sir Brian's recommendations as we in Wales see it. Sir Jonathan Montgomery's appointment was announced on the 8th of February 2024, at which time John Glenn confirmed that Earl Howe had met with Sir Jonathan to discuss the technical advice the expert group will provide. The expert group's terms of reference precluded them from engagement with the community. So any engagement we had with the Cabinet Office or the IBCA was meaningless, as the framework for compensation eligibility, criteria and tariffs had already been set, and so none of the groups could influence the decision making. And I think everybody has highlighted that really well. The main issue raised by Haemophilia Wales and others at the meetings we had with the Cabinet Office, and I won't go into what the meetings were like because I think everybody's done that, where basically we were talked at, we were allowed to speak for 3 or 4 minutes, but whatever issues we had, it was just on deaf ears. Nobody took any notice of them. And any issues that were taken forward for answers from the Cabinet Office, we didn't really get any results from those. So our main issue, Haemophilia Wales, and I know other campaigning groups said it because I've been in various meetings now, that Sir Brian's second interim report on compensation was not being implemented. And although the Cabinet Office kept denying that, that seems to be the case. None of those remarks were ever recorded by the Cabinet Office officials, and I haven't seen any of the high-level summaries that have been circulated from the engagement meetings stating that, but I can honestly say that I've always highlighted that. That's been my overarching issue, and I know I've been in meetings where various other groups have done that, but none of this has ever been recorded, and it was outside the remit of the IBCA and Robert Francis meetings. So when it was raised with Robert Francis, he was very polite, but he said it was out of his remit. So that's the position we were in. And as Samantha just mentioned, there's been no engagement, not only with the UK HCDO, the Haemophilia Doctors Association, but our legal representatives who have been with us from before the inquiry started. So we just feel that it was just a setup, really, where it was a tick-in-the-box exercise to say that we've had engagement with these groups. The outcomes were already decided. They'd probably decided that before they ever met any of us. And the high-level summary. The high-level summary, when I questioned that, it wasn't meant to be minutes, it was just a high-level summary. So if you asked for things to be included, sometimes they were, sometimes they weren't. But, you know, it's been totally ridiculous, really.
And you describe it in your statement as, well, essentially repeating the mistakes of the past. You put it this way: some of the fundamental failings of the state, and in particular the civil service and politicians, are being revisited on us all over again.
Yes, and you know, Sir Brian's interim report on compensation, 5th of April 2023, that's over 2 years ago now, has been ignored by government, even though we hear in meetings that they say that they're following Sir Brian's recommendations, and we know that, you know, everybody here knows that's not the case. Sir Jonathan Montgomery's appointment on the 8th of February, at which time John Glenn was the Paymaster General. This was before the inquiry final report was announced. John Glenn confirmed that Lord Howe had met with Sir Jonathan to discuss the technical advice and the expert group that the expert group will provide. Lord Howe most recently was congratulated by Baroness Neville Rolfe on the 1st of April 2025, and I quote, "is a master of the art of scrutiny in the most courteous and compelling way. When I arrived as health minister, when I arrived in the Lords, he was health minister and the person who I and most others chose to model ourselves on, effective at the dispatch box, in the tea rooms and in Whitehall. More recently, he steered the difficult legislation on infected blood through the House, working across party to excellent effect. Lord Howe, as the shadow leader of the House now, so as the government changed, Lord Howe is now the shadow leader of the House of Lords, has sat in Westminster for 40 years, and in his role as health minister in the Lords, blocked the Archer inquiry recommendations of 2009, and nearly everybody here will remember the debates in the Lords between himself and Lord Archer and Lord Morris. He ignored Justice Holman's ruling of the 16th of April 2010 and continued with the government line that the situation in Ireland was different. He has been guiding the hand of the government in denials and delays over the last 4 decades, consistently blocking Baroness Brinton's amendments to the Victims and Prisoners Bill, most recently in the Lords. He also blocked the Irish Health Amendment cards, which Lord Archer had recommended in 2009, giving priority access to infected blood patients. And his comments in the Lords that everybody can see was that they may be jumping the organ donation queue if they were given priority to organ donations. He also was responsible for the Haemophilia Alliance meetings, and Lord Archer had recommended that those meetings not only included care, they included financial support, but by the time the meetings were set up by the Department of Health and the UK HCDO doctors and patient groups, financial support was outside the remit. So every time that I brought up anything to do with financial support, I was told by the Department of Health, this is outside the remit.
Lynn, can I just stop you there for a moment? So that's you, as I understand it, really giving flesh to the bones of your concern that what's being seen now is essentially a repeat of that which the community has experienced over decades. Is that a fair way of summarising it?
Although it's the Cabinet Office we're dealing with, we now see the Cabinet Office shifting other responsibilities back onto the Department of Health. It was just back in 2010 we were dealing with the Department of Health.
Can I then just pick up one discrete point before I speak to Kate? In terms of the impact of the changes to what I'm going to call the special category mechanism.
Yes.
I know the Welsh equivalent has a different title. You've, I think, expressed the view that certainly those who you know in Wales, many of them want the opportunity to take their lump sum payment,
Yes.
and particularly those who are older, and get on with their lives,
Yes.
rather than be tied to support payments. And so you have a concern that that choice is being taken away.
I do, yeah, because we fought really hard in Wales not to get the SCM, or the special category mechanism, adopted, because we just felt that, again, people still had to produce quite a lot of evidence to support that. So we had more of a self-referral route where people could provide their own evidence of their own the psychological impact of being infected with contaminated blood. So it was very much, we were asking for a more holistic approach than eligibility criteria that people would need to jump further hurdles to. And that's worked out really well, because we've actually got a psychological support service and a welfare and benefits advice service in Wales. And that's not just open to the infected, that's open to the affected as well. Which has been important because some of the haemophilia families haven't wanted to go back to the psychology service in the haemophilia centre. So we feel all of that has now been undone, because, as we say, there's been various now obstacles put in the way where people will have to accept the ongoing payments rather than a lump sum payment, and if they don't do that, they won't get the level of support that has already been agreed back in 2017. So we feel we're going backwards now to where we were when we were trying to get the Welsh Government not to adopt the SCM, because we didn't feel it was suitable in Wales. People wanted a much wider support system, and that's what we hoped would come out of the inquiry. The thing that's really troubling now is that we're a year after Sir Brian's report, 2 years after the compensation report, and when we talk about Earl Howe, they're meeting with Sir Jonathan to discuss the technical advice the expert group will provide. There were bound to be obstacles to any progress put in place, and this is exactly what's happened, because people are now having to prove further eligibility for compensation. They have to prove the date of their infection, they have to prove the date of progression of the disease, which will be near to impossible, because in most places in the UK there weren't any consultant hepatologists, so people won't have been monitored. And liver disease, hepatitis C, is a silent killer. So many people might go along and they may not be categorized as having cirrhosis, either because they haven't been monitored, or they haven't been tested, or they haven't had a fibroscan or a biopsy, but also they could just go along in a fibrosis stage and suddenly their livers will decompensate and they'll suddenly be an end-stage liver disease and they'll be admitted through A&E. And we've seen that happen so many times in Wales. And that's why we campaigned, and we had a ministerial Welsh task and finish group to look at this issue of the lack of monitoring and consultant hepatology support in Wales, and we did manage to get a dedicated consultant hepatologist in Cardiff and in Swansea, but there are various places in the UK, and particularly in more outreach centres where the centres are very small, people will never have seen a hepatologist, and they're looked after by a blood-borne viral lead, who may not have the expertise in liver disease to be able to give a complete diagnosis. Therefore, they're not going to be able to prove the disease progression. They then have to provide the medical supporting evidence. Well, lots of people won't have been seen, so how will they do that? And as regards prioritising end-of-life claims, that I could go on about that for ages, but I just think it's totally inappropriate that we're in the position now. We're at such a late stage. People are now getting letters about being end-of-life. And the main issue we have is that asking people who are already registered to a support scheme and have already received an interim compensation payment to now provide further evidence that the inquiry has found in many cases has been destroyed or not readily available is another delaying tactic, repeating itself again. And this has been consistently used by successive governments. Applications for interim compensations for the previously unrecognised deaths are being rejected due to the lack of medical supporting evidence. And their evidence to the inquiry, where they've been, we know families, they've been involved since before the inquiry started. They came to us at the Welsh Assembly. They had nowhere else to go. They've been involved, they've given their evidence, and they're still being ignored and rejected. And this is not as Sir Brian intended in his second interim report on compensation 2 years ago, when he recommended an interim compensation be made to alleviate immediate suffering and recognise deaths previously unrecognised. And we've now got people in that category. In Wales, we knew we had 30, and we know that only 13 of those families have been paid. And the other 17, they're now in the red tape scenario of the inheritance tax, probate. They're changing the rules as they go along. We see updates where people are asked, not just for the chain of representation. They've sent people off looking for other. They need more proof. They're never gonna get that proof, but they're probably just going to be sent off again. The people, particularly in the transfusion cohort, who have never had their medical notes, all of those families will just be rejected, even though we're told we're told that IBCA will look at them again.
Lynn, I'm going to stop you there if I may.
Going on too long.
Those last points you've made, particularly important points to think about the evidential burden and how it's going to be discharged, are ones that we're definitely going to be picking up tomorrow morning with the IBCA witnesses.
Oh, right, okay.
I'm just going to move, if I may, to Kate.
Okay.
Kate, I think you're the only person on the panel not to have given live evidence to the inquiry before. Your statement is, on behalf of the Haemophilia Society, I think has echoed all of the themes and issues that we've heard voiced this morning. You've told us in your statement your principal concern was the failure to involve the infected and affected. But you've also said this in your statement, that you've been repeatedly told by the Cabinet Office that those decisions won't be revisited. Can you elaborate upon that for us, please?
Well, I think it's just illustrative of everything that everybody on the panel has said this morning, that there is a complete disregard for the patient voice. There is no real attempt to engage. It's an exercise in political manipulation of the whole community. And it goes back to, as people have alluded, the secret panel meeting behind closed doors that made fundamental mistakes that meant on the 21st of May, the charities and the campaign groups were overwhelmed with calls from a distraught and despairing community, which, as Sam said only 24 hours before, there had been some hope and some joy. But for us, for people with a bleeding disorder who have been mono-infected with hepatitis C, they call themselves that, that's not my phrase, the deep injustice they feel about the way they are being treated has to be addressed. The way the cruel and unusual punishment for bereaved partners of imposing a date of the 31st of March for your partner dies before, you get the support schemes for life, your partner dies after, nothing. The way the estates have been approached is a disgrace, and we have deep concerns from having worked with people who went through the interim process in the autumn, that the complexity has been completely misunderstood, and that when it gets to that stage, and let's hope it's not in another 4 years, the campaign groups and the charities will again be overwhelmed with trying to translate government speak into what will actually happen for them. And we're also deeply concerned that compensation from estates might actually not go to the people who have suffered the most.
In terms of the position of the affected, and we've heard from Mary a little about the position of bereaved partners, the inquiry has had many expressions of concern about how the scheme treats affected siblings, affected children whose parents were infected, many died, and the parents who watched their children die. Are those concerns the concerns of siblings, the concerns of children, concerns of parents? Is that something the society is also hearing?
Yeah, we've had many calls and messages from siblings who feel that they watched, in many cases, their brother die in the most horrendous of circumstances, and their loss is not recognised because they weren't living in the house at the time. For parents who've lost their children, for children who've lost their parents, it's just not good enough what is being proposed under the compensation scheme. And as Andy said, somebody who died young, their parents are being financially discriminated against because they died young, because they didn't have a career, because the state infected them and they died.
You know, as does Sam and all those who work for campaign groups and organisations, that one of the recommendations of the inquiry was about the provision of funding for those organisations. It won't surprise anyone here to know that you heard nothing on that for months, and then, by extraordinary coincidence, I believe you received a letter on last Friday.
Yeah. Well, I'm mindful that I'm in the room today and listening and watching online are many people who are in complete limbo about when they might receive or be invited to apply for their compensation. But I think this is indicative of the way everybody's being treated with patronising contempt. On the 25th of February, after months of badgering, we had a meeting with two representatives from the DHSC who had come to talk to us about Recommendation 10. We then, as did the Hep C Trust and the Thalassemia Society, there was then radio silence in spite of us offering to come in and make presentations to them until, now this is an interesting date, the 9th of April, the day the inquiry hearings were reopened, when we received a letter from the department asking us to make the case for funding to support our work on advocacy and supporting the patient voice. We were given until the 16th of April to do that. We asked for an extension which was granted for another 5 days. We did a lot of work on presenting that, not for the Haemophilia Society, but because we feel that with more resources, we can do more and better for the community who deserve so much more and so much better. Again, radio silence until 4 p.m. on Friday of the bank holiday weekend, when a letter was received by the Haemophilia Society, the Hep C Trust, and the Thalassemia Society with a funding offer and a request that we attend a meeting yesterday with department officials. We declined to attend that meeting.
And as I understand it, the funding offer that's been made, you think but aren't certain that it's for 1 year only.
Correct.
And you, the Hep C Trust and the Thalassemia Society, have got to sort out amongst yourselves who gets what.
Well, we're not entirely sure on that last point, but there was a sum of money, and I want to be transparent. The sum of money for 1 year and 1 year only was £500,000 to be divided between 3 organisations. And if you think that the lifespan, as we understand it, of IBCA is at least 6 years, and I think that's a gross underestimation. The charities have to continue and the campaign groups have to continue doing all of the work that, frankly, government and IBCA should be doing to support the community adequately And we, as our team, feel we don't give adequate support to the community because we just have such limited resources. So the timing was, let's be kind, suspect. And the amount of money on offer in no way reflects the amount of work that we try to do to support the infected blood community and the whole community of people with bleeding disorders.
I'm going to ask now for a general discussion on a couple of themes, and then I'm going to come to each of you because I want to make sure there's plenty of time for each of you to tell us what changes you think ought to be made. The first theme I want to ask about, and I'm going to go back to Bill to start this off, is a theme of accountability.
Well, I will answer your question, but could I just pick up a point about that Lynn talked about monitoring? And this relates to several of the recommendations of the inquiry are relevant to the compensation, the first recommendation. Monitoring is crucial to that. And we've had a very difficult series of discussions within what's called the Oversight and Assurance Committee in Scotland, which was set up to implement and work on the recommendations of this inquiry. That's the good bit, that's positive, that's Scottish Government taking the initiative. However, during a meeting that I attended as a replacement for our chair, John Dearden, I found myself in an adversarial position with the Deputy Chief Medical Officer of Scotland, because they'd been advised by a group of hepatologists that once treated through direct-acting antivirals, people with hepatitis, if they haven't actually reached scarring, fibrosis, they don't have to worry. They don't need to waste their time going to clinics being monitored. Our argument, and he said that, well, basically the evidence points to that. And I said, well, there was wider evidence during the inquiry, and that was taken into account, which is the psychological effect of all of this. Monitoring can be of benefit, and that should be a choice of the individual whether they want to go along and be checked. And of course, there are other comorbidities that people who are infected have, such as being overweight or alcohol. But that's critical to the compensation element, because there may well be a lot of people out there who have been infected, then supposedly cured, but still have either the psychological follow-up to that. And in relation to the tariffs, that's vitally important, that they've got an up-to-date picture of where they're up to. I mean, I myself was diagnosed with liver cancer a year ago. That's through monitoring, so I got a warning. But sorry, coming back to your question about accountability. We've got a real problem here, because this inquiry advised that an arm's length body report to Parliament in order to give us confidence that the government couldn't get its grubby hands on IBCA. We've had decades of not trusting government, and suddenly we have to trust a new government, remarkably with an inexperienced minister who hadn't necessarily been involved in the story previously. Many of the MPs who were involved in the all-party group lost their seats. Experience has been lost in Parliament to challenge government. Governments being challenged is part of democracy. And one of the things that really scares me is recommendation 12 of this inquiry basically said that the Parliamentary and Constitutional Affairs Committee of Parliament should be monitoring progress. In other words, holding ministers to account, not just an all-party group, but actually a parliamentary committee. Where on earth today is the chairman of that committee? He's not here because he's got another more important meeting. What's more important to the people in this room than the question of progress on the biggest disaster in the history of the NHS?
On that issue of accountability, is there anything, Lynn?
I'd like to say, please. So when I met with John Glenn, the previous Paymaster General, on the 2nd of May 2024, so a couple of weeks before the inquiry reported, I actually asked him, I said at the meeting, I highlighted the inquiry's findings regarding the inadequacy of the previous schemes. This point was noted, and John Glenn assured me that as the new body, these are my notes, as the new body would be a statutory body, the mistakes of the past would not be repeated. Now recommendation 14 of Sir Brian's report has not been adopted. I am reminded of the evidence of Nick Fish, the administrator of the old Skipton Fund and assistant to the CEO of the McFarlane Trust and the Caxton Foundation. And he gave the evidence on the 23rd of March 2021. And when he was questioned by yourself on the operational issues of Skipton, he reported that Skipton was an agent for the Department of Health, providing services within the scope of resources, and only operational issues could be raised with the Department of Health. And to our understanding, from what we see, that's exactly what the IBCA is doing.
And Lynn, you're not alone, I think, to have raised that comparison with Skipton in terms of how this scheme feels. Nigel, was there an observation you wanted to make?
Yeah, there is. Thank you, Jenny. I wanted to go back to a number of comments that have been made, reference recommendation 10. I had an exchange with the Minister on several occasions, and the chair of Haemophilia UK will know that he and I have been joisting with the Minister on this issue, and also with James Quinlan, the Director General. I explained to the Minister that he had responsibility to provide equality for all victims and all victims' organisations. I advised him also, and it was advice, that it would be appropriate for him not to abrogate his responsibility by passing the role onto a Minister of Health in the regional areas. My Minister of Health is having problems putting tyres on ambulances. He's having problems cleaning bed linen. He is hardly going to look at the advocacy funding for organisations who have literally, across the board, been providing the service that the Department of Health and the Cabinet Minister, under this inquiry's requirements, have allowed us to do without any support, any technical guidance, or any financial support. So I explained to him at our last meeting, and I said openly, if the decision is not to ensure parity for victims' organisations, and if in not allowing parity, it doesn't allow proportionality, because we're not all the same size, we don't all have the same issues, then it needs to be challenged, and challenged it will be. I asked him to give us an endorsement to ensure that he would top up from the Exchequer, as he had done in relation to ring-fencing interim payments through the Departments of Health and out to victims. The same principle applies. It's worked with that, it can work with this issue. But if we're going to continue for another 5, 6 or 7 or 8 years in providing a service that is really their responsibility, but we're closer to our community than they will ever be, it's critical that we get the opportunity to be supported and to allow us to provide the best service that we can for those who need it. It's a reassurance for them, and it's a confidence builder that they know the bona fides have been proven, and this will move forward to support them.
I'm reminded when we're talking about the comparison with Skipton and the repeat themes of mistakes of the past, of an observation which, Alan, I think is in your statement. The McFarlane Trust on steroids, I think was your description, or you and your colleagues' description.
That's exactly how we describe it. I mean, if I can read parts of my statement out. So Robert, he set out that the IBCA is an arm's length body, as recommended by Sir Brian. He then went on to explain that some concern may have arisen because the staff and board of the IBCA are all civil servants. But this problem will go away when the IBCA is able to employ staff directly. First, the IBCA may fulfil a technical definition of the ALB, but staffing it entirely with civil servants, seconded from the Cabinet Office and Treasury, does not suggest the kind of independence which the infected and affected community had hoped for and expected. Nor does it have any regard for Sir Brian's recommendation that the board should not feature a majority of civil servants currently in post. It's unclear to us why we should expect the current board and staff of the IBCA to act independently of government merely because of the technical change of the name of their employer from, say, the Cabinet Office to the IBCA. The IBCA has all but refused to actively engage with our legal representatives. They're usually consulted on topics after campaign groups and are not given advance sight or warning of proposals from the IBCA. Our own solicitor does not receive updates from the IBCA despite registering with them and having raised a concern with IBCA staff. Our solicitor has continued to support us since May 2024 despite not being paid by the IBCA to do so. We understand that other solicitors have continued to support their clients on a similar basis. This help has been invaluable to us in understanding the main points of the scheme's regulations, as well as what proposals and developments will mean in practice for individual claimants. Our impression is, not least because of the most recent meeting with Sir Robert, was that the IBCA has consistently sought to minimise the role of legal representation. We can only presume this is because they thought the misguided view that they will save costs by doing so. We describe the view as misguided because it is our understanding that the IBCA is in the process of hiring 900 claims managers to effectively repeat tasks that will have been undertaken by our lawyers. And in any event, in order to adequately advise us, we have estimated that over the course of 6 years, the total cost of 900 case managers will be at least £400 million, which seems somewhat wasteful considering that the same work can be undertaken by people who have known us, know all about us for the last 7 years and whom we trust. It is, of course, right that the IBCA and the Cabinet Office should consult with the infected and affected community about the shape of the comprehensive scheme, but the IBCA have done a very good job of perfecting a veneer of collaboration whilst proceeding to do precisely what it had planned before it entered into discussions with the infected and affected community. With the exception of written submissions which were made in summer 2024, we can't recall a single instance when IBCA have changed course because of something said to it or on behalf of the infected and affected community. From our first meeting with the IBCA in May 2024, we've always had the sense that their proposals are presented to us as a fait accompli. And whilst they would like us to approve of those proposals, they aren't prepared to change course if we don't.
Alan, sorry.
Yep.
Can I stop you there if that's
Of course.
all right? You, I think, have a particular experience to bring to bear on the issue of how compensation schemes or financial support schemes operate, because you had previous involvement and we've heard evidence from you about this before in the McFarlane Trust.
Yep.
You see, I think, this scheme as repeating what went wrong with the earlier schemes. Is that a fair account?
Definitely. I mean, they've even gone to the stage of employing so-called consultants now. Use the word consultants, that would be use the trustees and the McFarlane Trust, basically, except we were volunteers and the consultants are being paid. What they're being consulted on, I do not know, because I can't see any good that's came from any of it, really. And like I say, they seem to be more intent in wasting money, wasting time, than actually delivering what they should do.
That's, I think, the right moment for me to turn to the last part of our evidence session, because I want to ensure everybody gets the opportunity to tell the chair about the changes or recommendations that each of you would most like to see, given where things are now. And so I'll start actually at the far end of the table, Alan, and just go down the table, if I may. What is it, Alan, that given where we are today, what is it you would like to see changed?
Well, I'd like to see the speed in which this organisation is carrying out the so-called invites, which once again is an insult. I'd like to see a bit more empathy from them, to realise what they're doing each month. It's just adding to the mental anguish of the affected and infected by having this so-called draw that they do. You know, is your name going to be out? You know, is it going to be your month? They need to be held to account for that. They need to engage more with solicitors. I mean, I started campaigning 37 years ago. My children were young then, and I've now got my grandchildren here now. I mean, this is ridiculous. I'm here again after a year from last year. We're all euphoric and all so pleased. But here we are again, and they're playing games with our mental health and our physical health. And they've got to be made to realise what they're doing. I'm sure they do understand what they're doing, because I'm sure they can't be that thick. But it is like trying to nail custard to a wall. You know, it's impossible almost. You can talk to them, but they don't seem to listen. And as I say, they need to listen more, and they need to act more. And they need to make this happen a lot quicker than 2029, because that's bloody disgraceful, to be honest. That really is.
Kaz.
I'd like to read out something that I wrote, if that's okay, and to thank Tommy for his help with this.
Can you just speak a little closer to the microphone, Kaz? Thank you.
Okay, what changes I want to see as a result of these hearings. The compensation scheme devised by the Cabinet Office is not fit for purpose. The working at pace lie peddled by officials and politicians is nigh on criminal. Government have been killing time while viruses have been killing us. Government should spend more time listening to their citizens than to their Cabinet Office officials. If they did, we would not be in the mess we're in just now. To alleviate the detrimental impact on the community, the government and IBCA need to start listening and responding to the concerns of infected and affected people, and to make the relevant changes. They should engage with greater transparency and genuine candour as promoted by the Prime Minister Keir Starmer. There should be genuine consultation with the infected and affected community, rather than the tick-box engagement charities and campaigners have endured thus far. And the deeply flawed regulations should be amended accordingly. There will never be faith and trust in the process unless this is undertaken. Cabinet and or IBCA must register with haste all so far excluded living infected individuals. This should include those infected after the cut-off dates, those infected with chronic HBV, and those with missing records and self-clearers. It is not our fault if we were infected a little too late or with the wrong virus, or if hospitals lost or destroyed medical notes. We are the living infected excluded from all current and financial support and interim compensations, now placed at the back of the queue for their compensation process to begin. These excluded living infected people should be paid interim compensation of £310,000 now, just like other living infected people. And we should be offered the choice of support payments for life, just like everyone else. To fail to do this is simply immoral. The whole scheme should be simplified in order to speed up the roll-up of compensation. The complexities and impossible to jump through hoops that the hepatitis community have been expected to deal with and which are causing extreme stress, anxiety, and anger should be removed. People cannot be expected to be constantly re-traumatized, searching for evidence that is unlikely to exist just to prove how very ill they are. There should be parity between the tariffs for the different killer viruses, and the processes should be simple and streamlined, as it is for the HIV infected. And I want to thank Glenn and CBC for the flowchart that they've just produced, which shows the difference, and the chart for Hep C is like a complicated underground map, whereas the simple process for HIV, which they absolutely, I'm not saying the HIV community don't deserve every penny, but everybody does, and there shouldn't be any division. So there should be parity between the tariffs for the different killer viruses, and the process should be simple and streamlined as it is for HIV infected. They could begin by removing the ridiculous 40% reduction on financial losses and recognize that most of us were too ill to work. If this happened, the hepatitis community would feel their lives were worth the same as others. The government should dispense with the muddle of the complicated severity bandings which focus on existing liver damage and ignore all other extrahepatic consequences, and the limited and very selective severe health condition criteria of the supplementary route, which has not been informed by the lived experiences of the infected or by the science, and was created behind closed doors in secret by the government's own so-called expert group. Instead, they should offer parity with HIV tariffs. This would speed things up and mean that many will not have to resort to court proceedings. There are living infected who are not yet registered. There are bereaved spouses, bereaved parents, and bereaved children who are suffering immeasurably, whose lives have been destroyed and have been waiting for decades for justice for their loved ones. They cannot find any peace until they get closure. There's a strong call from many widows that IBCA stop using the term infected estates and instead refer to their loved ones who paid the ultimate price of death as the infected deceased. Those who died need to be prioritized as the living infected are. There should be also higher payments for affected children, some of whom live with a dying or very ill parent, many of whom witnessed their parent die in a horrible way, traumatizing them for life. This disaster and its reach is unprecedented. For many affected people, some who are elderly and ill themselves, like widows, widowers, parents of deceased children, they should be allowed to have the compensation they are due in their own right to be paid to their estates should they themselves die before finalizing their compensation. Under the existing regulations, their compensation will die with them. should they die before their compensation is finalised. This is not natural justice for such an unprecedented disaster. And many such people are dying, and the rate of death will only increase month by month. These deaths will save the Treasury a lot of money. Immorality does have a price, it seems. Rather than spending money on PR, the government needs to fix the issues that we've been complaining about for months. We need proper financial and legal support and a clear timeline for when payments will be made to all infected and affected. Last but not least, there should be proper funding to the various charities and support groups who've been holding the community together with no support from government. This funding should be backdated to when the inquiry published its final report in May last year. It's the campaign leads who are carrying the heaviest burden, and they're utterly exhausted and burned out now. Many have been doing this with no funding. They need respect, but most importantly, they need commensurate financial grants, at least until IBCA completes its work. In conclusion, there should be parity and fairness in the tariffs across the community, and more speed, genuine engagement, candour and transparency in the rollout of compensation. We don't have time on our side or the energy to keep fighting for justice.
Thank you, Kaz. Andy.
Before I begin with my recommendations, I just wanted to say that this community has had very few friends over the years. We were made to feel dirty. We were told that this didn't happen to us. That changed on the 20th of May last year. And so I'd like to say thank you to Sir Brian, Jenny, and the entire inquiry for having the compassion, the understanding, the friendship, and the foresight to keep this inquiry open. Thank you, Sir Brian. As Kaz just pointed out, we're very tired. We can't be doing this for much longer. Stress levels of campaigners have been at their highest levels since I can remember. None of us want to be here again. I hope that this is the beginning of the end now, for sure. And with that, given where we are with the compensation scheme at the moment, these are practical suggestions that I feel could be implemented straight away to help fix the problems that we've identified. First of all, estates of the deceased should not be punished because their loved ones died early. There must be some recognition. There must be some recognition for years not lived. Open up the supplementary route for financial loss to the affected who have had to give up work due to caring or their own personal mental health. Reevaluate the tariffs for hepatitis C. Get rid of the complexity. Take into account non-liver-centric effects and the damage of interferon treatments, and significantly increase those tariffs. Immediately reinstate support payments to partners bereaved after the 31st of March 2025 until such time as they receive compensation, and have the continuing payments as an option in their compensation package. Address the disparity between the core and adjusted or IBS routes by implementing a top-up to the core route, equalising it to the value of the adjusted route over a lifetime. Enable the estates of affected people to be claimed if they die before they are called for compensation. Examine the options concerning ensuring that estate payments are made to the correct people. Allow children who have never achieved earning capability due to their infections to claim supplementary financial loss for lost potential. Re-examine the arm's-length body status of IBCA. It must be both High Court judge-led and crucially answerable to Parliament, not to government. Assess the true value of past engagements with the Cabinet Office and ensure that it is fully open to changing the scheme moving forward due to the lack of engagement by the expert group. Recognise within the scheme that people with bleeding disorders were infected multiple times with multiple pathogens with accumulative effects as part of deliberate acts of negligence and add a tariff accordingly. Recognise that all people with bleeding disorders were the subject of unethical trials, as were their sexual partners. And increase the additional payment for this considerably to account for the physical and psychological harm that this has caused. And finally, either do not discount regular support payments paid after the 31st of March 2025 from the compensation value, or add lost interest due to payments on compensation from that date. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. Mary.
Before I give my recommendations, I'd like to just say something that hasn't been touched on. The perception by the general public of what's happening with us. I had to cancel something so I could come here today, and I had to explain to people why I had to come here, and the general public don't know what's happening here. I mean, people are saying to me, "Oh, isn't that done? It's done and dusted now? Why hasn't it been done and dusted? You know, have you got to really come back here now and fight again?" You know, and this is really because this has been underreported by the press, and I'm looking at the press now and saying, please, will you report properly on what's happened today?
Mary, can you just repeat that last bit? There was so much clapping.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm looking at the press now and saying, will you please report properly on this? Because it's been very underreported, and people in the general public don't understand what's happened. As to my recommendations, I think some of these things have been touched on. Please, we want the registration of the affected who are not on schemes already as quickly as possible. We know who those people are in the main. We can give those names, if with, of course, permission to be put forward. We could have done this, years ago, and it hasn't happened. We would like a timeline for the payments to estates, because we don't know, we haven't been given any timeline with that. It's as though the people who have died have been totally forgotten. The next point, the memorial. Somebody has asked me to speak. We were promised a memorial, but we don't, as far as I know, we don't know anything any more about it. So please, can we know a bit more about the memorial? One very important point for me personally is not just the money, it's the justice. And I really want to know what we are being compensated for. We actually do know, but they're not telling us what they're compensating us for. And as far as I'm concerned, if they don't do that in a written letter, then it's just another ex gratia payment. And the very last thing I want to say is, I think it's been touched on, the psychological support, because I think this is so important that, even after we receive the compensation, we all still need this psychological support. And I've asked IBCA about it, and they don't seem to know what's happening. They tell me they don't know, and that's it. So we need that. I think that's
Mary, just tying together briefly before I turn to Nigel, two of the points you've just made about the media and about compensation not only being about the finance,
yes,
but being about the recognition of injustice.
Yes.
I'm happy to say the BBC this morning at 6:15 were absolutely reporting a woman saying exactly that. So the point you've made, I know, is one that's shared by many who are here and many who are listening. Nigel.
Thanks, Jenny. Sir Brian, I just want to make reference primarily to the Act, the Victims and Prisoners Act, and I quote from it. The Act also empowers the Secretary of State or Minister for the Cabinet Office to make such arrangements as they consider appropriate for the provision of support and assistance to applicants or potential applicants for compensation under the Infected Blood Compensation Scheme. But I also reference the fact that yourself and in this briefing document that has been issued, it highlights also that very substantial delay in the receipt of compensation could be brought about by considerable change to the existing process. With that in mind, I'm offering more observations than I am recommendations. But these are directly geared or pointed at the Cabinet Minister, at the Director General, at Sir Robert Francis, and also at David Foley. You all have power over the process, but the paymaster has the authority. Personally, I don't see systematic change, but what I do see is a need to see effective, proactive determination to demonstrate impactful change. I am fed up being blindsided, as every other member in here is. No more blindsiding. There is an inordinate amount of time spent in trying to get this process to move forward based on the principles of the recommendations of this inquiry. That has to change. I've already referenced how that might change in a generic sense. Spend the money. It's effectively causing devastation to a number of lives. More case officers or claims managers, or whatever the mantra is, into the cases, so we get a reasonable timeline that people can accommodate and come to terms with, which will give us a degree of justice. Afford all victims the equality that they deserve, Stop the victimhood tears. We've heard examples on stage, and people know where they lie in relation to this, whether they are currently recognised as victims or are not yet recognised, and I'm hoping they will be after this process. Every victim has rights. The rights must not be ignored. They must have been given. They must not have been excluded, nor those who are about to die or who are too old as affected victims to see this process through. I say to the Cabinet Minister, and it's appropriate because he's coming in after us. He's the afternoon session. Work with us like never before and ensure that we are not just listened to, but we are also heard.
Thank you, Nigel. Gary.
I'd like to echo everything that everyone has said here, but I think it is most important that we do look at tariffs again at the unethical research. I think this is just, I was personally told it was a token gesture, so you can make your own decision over that. I also think there's a problem with psychotherapists and psychiatrists. A lot of haemophilia centres do not have psychiatrists. They only have psychotherapists. And by all accounts, this will not be taken as evidence. And I think it really should be looked at again. I think there should be more support for the families and estates of lost tree lord boys, but everyone. That's basically all I've got to say.
Thank you, Gary. Bill.
I have 6 points, and they largely relate to the big picture here. We have to fix this. The question is, how do we fix it? I think there's a test today, actually, because the Minister will probably be watching this in advance of this afternoon. He can do one of two things. He can get on to his press officers in terms of managing the negative media that will emanate from this morning. This inquiry, in its own report, right at the beginning, talks about this, about how governments, successive governments, have perceived the need to be on the right side of the media, probably more important to us. Frankly, I remain 25 years on haunted by a statement from the office of the then Health Minister in Scotland when the First Minister said, just remember, asking a question might cost a penny or two. And the response back from the Health Minister was, don't worry, it's a PR exercise in terms of talking to us. 25 years on, we're here. So, recommendation 1, any decent human being of a minister, having heard what we say here, we've said here today on the panel, instead of instructing his press officers to deal with this, should be knocking on our doors to see how we move this forward. I'm sure all the panelists will agree with that. Recommendation 2, we need to inhabit IBCA from the top to the bottom, not sort of 3 user consultants or whatever they are, some way down the food chain. This inquiry recommended for an arm's length body involvement of representatives of us. There's massive expertise in this room on the board of IBCA, and that way we've got an opportunity to shape better what it does. And we need, in the third point, flexibility in the way that IBCA develops, in terms of developing its own policies rather than being told by the government what to do. rather than following the recommendations of this inquiry, which they've clearly gone against. Our expectation is that the recommendations of the inquiry are followed to the full. It's perfectly reasonable for us to feel that after all these years. A friend and member of Haemophilia Scotland said to me that he thought that the approach that's been taken so far by IBCA has been patchwork. IBCA needs to develop a very clear strategy and plan on the way how it feels they're going to move forward. And that needs to happen extremely quickly, because one of the biggest problems we have here is that families, for example, feel they have no foothold in this process, that they're going to have to wait 4 years. That needs to change in terms of setting out how they are going to be supported and when. The fourth recommendation is we have a wealth of expertise sitting just behind you there, Jenny. They have the knowledge and ability very quickly to revisit the tariffs that we've all talked about and come up with something more effective. It happened when we had the financial review in Scotland. It could be done very quickly. Now, it can be done one of two ways. Either a collaborative approach, such as I talked about earlier, or at least the people sitting behind you are able to test the tariffs. That opportunity has never been arisen. Normally, in a medical damages claim situation, there would be an adversarial approach where there would be pursuers, and we'd be the pursuers. The government or its agencies, like the NHS, would be the defenders, and very often you would find that amounts are reached. That could be done with these tariffs, with the expertise sitting behind you, with the RLRs. Finally, we need accountability. And I was critical earlier of the Parliament and Constitutional Affairs Committee. We've ended up here today because we came back to the inquiry because we felt we got nowhere else to go. The all-party group, there are a few survivors from the committee, the all-party group that met prior to the election last year. But its influence has been, I'm afraid, much diminished here. So we've ended up back here, and I would echo what Andy said in our thanks to the inquiry, to you, Sir Brian, for at least giving this opportunity to try and turn a corner and find a new way forward.
Thank you, Bill. Kate.
I just want to endorse what everybody on this panel has said in their recommendations, and I don't want to repeat them because they've been said very articulately, but I would like to add, as Bill said, every recommendation of this inquiry needs to be implemented, and not least recommendation 5, ending the defensive nature or culture of the civil service and the government. Infected blood, Hillsborough, Grenfell, the post office, the veterans of nuclear testing, the list goes on and on. When is government going to learn? They are the servants of the people, not the other way round.
Thank you, Kate. Lynn.
The first point I'd like to make is that no one should have to wait to be invited for compensation after 40 years. The government need to pay all of the people who are currently registered to the schemes, pay them, pay them now, and then they need to register, and this could easily be done with the help of our legal representatives starting off the claim, register everybody then who is making a claim. So that includes the affected, the estates, and the new applicants to the scheme, we'll call them, the unregistered currently. So that's Hep B, new claims, those infected after 91 cut-off date, natural clearers. And those already in the schemes have already pre-qualified, so there's no reason why they just can't be paid. So the 4,631 who are currently registered to the UK schemes, they can be paid now. And then... and all those with recognised legal representatives, they could start their claims to ensure that the process runs smoothly. When the government say that they're continuing to employ more caseworkers, we think it's self-evident that the additional questions people are having to answer to make a claim are designed to slow the process down, with a scheme that's designed to minimise payments and maximise bureaucracy. And the paradox is, of course, the scaling up that is envisaged by the IBCA and the Cabinet Office is the scaling up of the employment of caseworkers and civil servants to send those already eligible and registered or entitled to compensation off looking for further proof that doesn't exist. And this, in turn, is creating a bigger burden on the NHS because all the doctors, I know for a fact the UK HCDO has caused a huge amount of work for them, but the transfusion cases, they don't even have a consultant. They don't know where to start. As Samantha said, they have to go to the GP, and nobody understands what's happening. So the difficulty I see, if they continue in the way they're doing, like we had an email last night saying they'd made offers or they'd started applications or invited more people, but all those people will get stuck in the system because the eligibility criteria is so high. So they might get people in through the door, but they'll all be stuck, and we're seeing that by the amount of the actual payments that are made. Sorry, the last figures I had were from the week before, but we got an email last night, so apologies. I think some more people have been invited. But of the 137 offers that have been made, only 77 were paid. So all those, the 77 to the 137, I'm not very good at maths, but they're all stuck in a system, and that system's just going to get more and more stuck if they continue with this process of waiting for people to be invited. Whereas the current schemes, the devolved schemes, existing schemes, provided the money comes from the Treasury, those payments could be made to the infected and the affected bereaved. The affected should be quite straightforward in most cases because they're connected to the affected. Sorry, the estate claims would be easy in most cases because they are connected to the affected or the infected. And then that would give these caseworkers, less of them, but more time to look at the rest of the people who aren't already registered. But they have to involve our legal representatives because they've got all the evidence needed to start off the claim. And I think what happens, which I'm concerned about, I was actually just speaking to somebody at break time. I'd met them on the tube. We'd never met before. And she's somebody who doesn't have a legal representative. And what concerns me is that people go online and they Google it, and you see lawyers who haven't previously been involved. And this person was under the understanding that she might have to pay for legal support. And it was only through a conversation over coffee, I said, well, you need to, if you register with one of the legal representatives, you won't need to do that. So we'll have all these people who don't know where to turn, if they, but if it's clearly conveyed to them, people will know what to do. But I think obviously this has all been part of the government's plan to minimise claims, obviously, and the cost of everything. And this just isn't in the spirit of openness and transparency and candour as Sir Brian intended.
Thank you, Lynn. Sam.
Thanks, Jenny. If I may first read out on behalf of Nicola Leahy, who should have joined us on the panel today.
Yes, of course.
I said in my closing statement 2 years ago that the community have been let down and we have lost our faith and trust in the government and the country's institutions that should be supporting us, and that we needed that faith and trust restored. But now, yet again, we have been let down, treated with disrespect and further traumatised. I want the compensation to be governed and administered by a professionally led service that we can trust, i.e. professionally trained people that do not breach confidentiality by adding our contact numbers in letters to other beneficiaries. I want to trust their calculations so they don't have to admit mistakes and pay an additional amount for the miscalculation. So this actually begs the question that if they can arrange supplementary payments to cover for their mistakes, why can't they arrange to pay lost interest because of the time delay? I want our compensation awards paid with fairness and speed, as was described at the beginning of the process. I want the SCM recognised and reinstated. I want the infected blood psychology service securely financed and launched with enough staff to support the needy, psychologically damaged community. I want the extra hepatic manifestations acknowledged and awarded for. I want the effects of the horrifically physical and psychologically damaging interferon and ribavirin treatments acknowledged and awarded for. I want to suggest that the affected payment awards be addressed at the same time as those of the infected. It would be logical to link the affected to a living infected award claim, therefore utilising one claim manager, dealing with one family, one lot of documents and details. I want the affected person's claims not to die with them if not awarded and accepted. We are an ageing population, and that affected person may have had to give up work, and therefore the money lost would have been part of their estate. I want the cut-off date excluded victims recognised quickly.
And we thank Nicola for that in her absence.
Yes, thank you, Nicola. Thank you. And before I go into the Trust's asks, I just want to pick up a little on what Lynn was mentioning there, about how vital it is for people going through this process, whatever it may look like. Hopefully it will look a lot better in the future than how it does presently, but how vital it is that people have support, guidance, someone independent to talk that through with. Absolutely, the legal representatives are a vital part of that. They are available for some, it is difficult. I'd like to again echo, I think it was you, Lynn, who said about how people are going, unfortunately, to a telephone book. And picking out, no win, no fee, people that know nothing about this situation. And it's absolutely vital that they hear an independent voice, someone like ourselves and Haemophilia Society who are dealing with the community to make sure at the start of their claims they've got the information they need. We have heard of people going through the claims process. To be fair, to be balanced, some of them have got through it. They found it fairly straightforward, and they've been satisfied with it. We've heard from others where it's still unfortunately ongoing. We've heard from others where various problems have come up along the way that perhaps haven't been accounted for. It's great to hear that claim managers will be supportive and guide people through the process, but I think it's absolutely vital for this community to have proper legal representation with that, and absolutely friendly advice, support and guidance from organisations like ourselves. Rather, as Kate said, I would agree with everything that's been brought up so far. My memory doesn't go back that far for all of them, so I'm sorry if there's some repetition here, but these are the things that the Hepatitis C Trust would particularly like to see. There must be discretion with IBCA to deal with unique cases. We need a medical panel and an appeal system. As I said earlier, no two people are the same. One example is a caller we have who went blind as a result of his interferon treatment. He doesn't stand to benefit anything extra from the awards as they currently are, which is just ridiculous. That's an extreme example. As I was talking about earlier, there may be mental health problems and other physical problems that are going to be difficult for people to demonstrate, but everybody needs to be approached as an individual. The Severe Health Award must be reviewed. Those on SCM should be honoured as it is. They've been accepted already. That should just transfer. There shouldn't be any additional burden. There should be a review of the parity for awards for people on the schemes and those that are not. Staying on the schemes and taking a lump sum. For some people that may work well, for others not so much. There must be fairness for people with hepatitis B and post-91. They should have the choice whether to stay on the schemes or not, but the problem with that is the ongoing relationship over time with, I know Andy's referred to it elsewhere as sort of ongoing abuse. Ongoing contact with the abusers. It would be much better for the payments to be sorted out in a better way. Any and all revisions and tweaks, ideas, have to come with consultation from the community. Everybody here has a voice. Everybody here has a very individual situation and something to bring to the table. There are organisations like ourselves and haemophilia who have long experience of talking to thousands of you. At the Hep C Trust, just since May last year, we've spoken to 10,000 people. I mean, an incredible amount of knowledge is gained from those conversations, and I feel we have a lot that we can do to support you going forwards. It's very important. And lastly, everybody alive now or since the end of the inquiry should absolutely be eligible to claim. The government should not profit from delaying any further.
Thank you, Sam. Sir Brian, that ends our evidence session for this morning.
Well, I have no questions of my own, but it does remain for me to say this collectively to all of you. Individual as you may be, you made the point that you need to be treated as individuals. It would take too long to thank you each for your contributions. But I would say this, that in what you have said on paper and sometimes orally, you've told us how the sheer weight of the campaigns which you have done has made it, has imposed an almost impossible burden upon you. And yet, here you are, yet again, shouldering that burden. And I can well understand why everyone here would be really very grateful and thankful for you being prepared to do that tough as it is today. Thank you. Well, that speaks for itself. We will take a break. You might want some lunch. And we'll come back at no later, please, than 2:30, which is the earliest that the Minister can be here to give his evidence. So no later than 2:30.